Yo, what is up guys and gals? Welcome back to another chess video. This is me, JK Jax, back at it again. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to play the Vienna Part 6. Please forgive my hair, I've clipped it up with a hairband, so I currently look like Mao Zedong, but enjoy the sight while you can. So, in today's video, I want to talk about the move Bishop to b4, which is the last move that you basically need to study for Vienna. And I'm including it in because there is still like maybe 2 to 3% of people who will try to take you off prep with the move Bishop to b4. And fun fact, I did make a YouTube short on this specific opening because I lost to it in a chess game like 2 to 3 years ago. And then I was so pissed that I decided to study against this move and then made it into a YouTube short on my old YouTube channel. And in that video, I suggested knight d5, which is still the best move today. For the reasons with knight d5 is that you control the center, you put the knight on the central square, so it controls a lot of space in the opponent's territory. You're putting immediate pressure on the dark square bishop, forcing the opponent to respond. So retreating moves such as bishop to a5 is way too passive because you have moves like b4 and queen to g4. So for white here, already right off the bat, you have two ideas. The first idea of this variation of the Vienna is that white wants to play for c3 and d4. That is the first plan. The second plan is to bring your queen to g4 and attack the pawn on g7. So this is where the queen wants to be most of the time, to be on g4 and putting pressure on the g7 square, and possibly in the future maybe even h5, and then you probe black to create more weaknesses in his position with g6, something like this, right? So these are the two ideas that you need to play for. So of course, and let's say a5, you have c3, you also have queen g4. It's pretty much the same thing. So what can black play here to not like lose on the spot? Well, black can play knight c6, which is understandable. You develop a knight, you defend the bishop without having to move the piece, so you don't lose a tempo. But the best move is to actually play bishop to c5, which is the most critical and the most challenging line. Bishop e7 is a little bit more passive, and so I'll cover all these three moves today. Let's start with knight to c6. It makes quite a lot of sense. You develop the knight, you don't waste tempo, you defend the bishop, and if they take, you take, and white loses an important knight. But what you can do is just calmly develop with knight to f3, and let's say knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Now you play the move pawn to c3, attacking the dark square bishop. The dark square bishop needs to retreat. Possibly you'll see most of the time to e7. If a5, then you can play b4 and a4. So bishop e7 will be the move here. And now you need to defend the pawn on d4. My recommendation is bishop to d3, not queen d2, because the queen on d1 actually helps to support the d4 pawn push. So you want the queen to be on d1, and of course you can't play the queen to g4 anymore, but once again, the queen will be more useful on this square, and in the future you can consider going queen b3 or queen a4. So you play bishop d3 to defend the pawn, and now your idea is to play for the d4 pawn push. How do you achieve that? You slide the bishop back, you push the pawn to d4. This is very similar to the Ruy Lopez opening, where white will rotate his bishop all the way back to c2, and then c3 and d4 and play for central control. So if you played the Ruy Lopez before, this knowledge transfers over. Otherwise, you just learned a little bit of what the Ruy Lopez is like. Congrats! So that'll be pretty much it against knight to c6. If they play bishop to e7, now I want you to play dynamically d4, opening up the dark square bishop. And you want the opponent to take, because if they play something like d6, which is super passive, although yes, that opens up the dark square bishop, you can simply trade, and now play this very nice move, queen h5. So now you're hitting the pawn on e5 and you're forcing the opponent to respond with something like knight to c6, bishop to b5, bishop d7, trades, takes. And here, white is just simply up a pawn, white has central control, and life is good. Of course, black may try to create more trades, but development is actually very, very simple for you. So let's say takes, and let's say knight f6, you can just continue developing and long castles just like this. Now be it against bishop to e7, and let's say if they take the pawn on d4, then you play the move bishop f4, which hits the pawn on c7 twice, and there's only one defense to this, which is d6. So against d6, you can simply just take the pawn on d4, and now your queen is hitting the g7 pawn, forcing the opponent to react. Knight f6, and now this is the key idea of white. Please remember this. So what white wants to do is to first trade the knight for the dark square bishop. I know this is a little bit counterintuitive, but hear me out. What white wants to do in the end is to play e5. That is the main pawn break that white wants to go for in this specific variation. And then white will long castle. So you trade, queen takes, and now you long castle first. Let's say knight c6, you can just play bishop b5. All is good here. Castles, very natural. You can take the knight and then e5. That is what you're aiming for at the end of the day. e5 opens up so many possibilities. You're opening up the e file, you're forcing black to respond, and development is actually very simple. Knight f3, maybe even knight e2, but mainly you want to keep the e file open to put the rook on e1, right? So knight f3, rook e1, and just obliterate black. Now you still have to be a little bit precise because your king side is kind of weak. The opponent can sort of take advantage of this by playing moves like rook b8, and at some point to try and find a way to bring the queen over to the king side somehow. But it's very hard for black to do so with his terrible pawn structure and lack of activity. There's just a mixture of everything that doesn't go his way for black. So that'll be it against bishop to e7. Finally, we'll come to the main line, which is bishop to c5. So bishop to c5. Here, I recommend a sneaky little gambit. d4. That just loses a pawn. Straight up loses a pawn. Now taking with the pawn is bad because once again, bishop f4. This is a very common move in all these types of positions where if black were to take the pawn on d4, you always put your bishop on f4, which hits the pawn on c7. And there's only one move that sort of equalizes the game. It's not even equalized, white is just better, but d6 is the only move to neutralize the attack. And then you can play b4, bishop b6, and then now a4. And this position is just hell for black. Like, all hell breaks loose with this. And let's say a6, and now you just take the bishop and take the pawn on d4. You gain back your pawn, but in what you get back for free is a huge ton of activity, right? You take, and look at this. Black's pawn structure is as bad as my acne on my face. It is absolutely horrendous. Weak pawn on d6, weak pawn on b6, weak pawn on g7. Everything is weak. Even my knees after I run like 5 kilometers. So insane. Great variation for white. White is just much better here. Taking is not even right. You should take with the bishop instead to maintain this pawn on e5 and prevent the dark square bishop from ever going to f4. Here, I want you to develop calmly with knight to f3, and most players here will just play knight c6, which is the best move. Then you're going to continue your development as per normal. You're going to go c3, kick away this dark square bishop, and then you can play something like bishop c4 or maybe even a4. There's another move that the opponent can play. c6 attacks your knight. Right, makes sense. You take the bishop on d4, And if the opponent were to play c takes d5, save your knight, you play knight f5, you win a pawn, you win another pawn on g7. Great, fantastic. Okay, you're just picking up so much material. However, if they take your knight on d4, you play knight f4, and now you just win a free pawn on d4 like that. Simple as that. Again, if they play something to defend the pawn on d4, just go queen g4, and they can't do much about it anyway. And for example, like c5, queen g4, g6, then you can play something like bishop to c4, a good developing move, and even better developing move, knight d5. Look at the amount of squares it controls. It is absolutely mad. And you can just play moves like bishop to g5, which just increases crazy amounts of pressure in the position. And you can also play something like queen to g3, which threatens knight c6 fork. You can also play something like queen to g3, which threatens knight to c7 fork. And there's very little black can do. But if you want to farm brilliant moves, I want to show you a very nice line. You can actually sacrifice your knight here. The idea is that if they take the knight, you trap the rook. Well, Jack, they can defend. The rook is not trapped. Well, my friends, why stop at sacrificing a knight? You can now sacrifice the bishop! Bishop to h6. What? Well, now after the queen takes, the rook is hanging. The rook is hanging. Right? And white is slightly better here. If they play king f8, all the other moves, losers. Legit, king f8 is the only saving grace. And even so, it's very unclear. You take a free pawn, now you're just up a pawn, right? And let's say queen f6 takes and takes, you're just playing essentially up a pawn. This is just a winning, you just trade everything now and it's a winning endgame for white. One good thing about white here is that even though in the middle game, two pieces are better than a rook, the two pieces are not even developed. They can't even develop anywhere. That's the best part. It's so inactive. And you can even like sort of restrict black further with the move d6, and that will legit make this light square bishop stuck for the rest of the game. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.